Section 17 of Shadowland, September 1919. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Chris Pyle. Shadowland, September 1919, by Various. The Misleading Widow, by Hamilton King. Fictionized, by permission, from the famous Players Lasky film production based on the scenario of Francis Marion, in turn derived from F. Tennyson Jesse and H. M. Harwood's stage play, Billeted, starring Billy Burke as Betty Tarrandine, with James L. Crane as Captain Peter Rymill, Frank Mills as Colonel Preedy, Madeline Clare as Penelope Moon, Fred Hearn as the Reverend Ambrose Liptret, and Frederick Esmerton as Mr. McFarland, directed by J. S. Robertson. Betty Tarrandine had sinful red hair and a talent for men which amounted to positive genius. She had, and not secondarily, a genius for the prodigal spending of moneys, and the non-payment of what she considered perfectly insolent bills. Finished the description by saying that everybody loved her nearly to death for the good and sufficient reason that they just simply couldn't help themselves, and you will know all that is necessary for you to know about Betty Tarrandine. Of course, the small New England village in which she had come across and purchased her love-duck of a house didn't hold the same opinion. They, or it, wanted to know a considerable deal more about Betty Tarrandine. "Any woman with such hair," said the village, "and such a way with men, well—" The well was damning and conclusive. In such a village, for a woman to be young, a widow, so she says, to have hair as red as the most delicious sin, and to have men following at her nonchalant 10-inch heels like so many whipped dogs. What more does a village need? Naturally, she must violate at least 90% of the 10 Commandments. Naturally, my dear. Betty Tarrandine and her chum, Penelope Moon, had inhabited the austere village for a period of 3 months and had given it a consecutive and running series of at least thrice that many shocks, when there came the smasher in the rapidly spread information that the one and only hospital for wounded soldiers could not possibly accommodate the overflow, that some of the officers would have, perforce, to be billeted privately, and that woman, the Tarrandine woman, you know, had actually contracted for 2 officers to stay beneath her unhallowed roof. It could only mean one thing. The village to an inhabitant had never had an evil thought. But it could only mean one thing. To a woman, at least, the town pursed up its impeccable lips, elevated its head, and gathered its spotless skirts about its orthopedic heels. Naturally, all things are essentially natural. It behooved the spiritual adviser of the village, the Reverend Liptret, and his still more reverend sister, to remonstrate with the at least potential Magdalene. It was their duty, as they saw it, and they always saw it. Had they ever failed in the doing of their duty? Had they? They asked the village. Hadn't they paid semi-weekly visits to that shameless girl, who had brought home with her from parts unknown a baby? The unspeakable girl who defied the village and said that love was all, and that once there had been one who had said, ever so gently, "Forgive her, for she loved much." Hadn't they labored with that girl, persisted with her, that she brazenly went and rid the village of herself by the theft of her own life, only went to prove more conclusively that the wages of sin is death, which they had told her, and told her, and told her? Hadn't they visited and visited Seaman Abbott, who was a confirmed drunkard with the heart of a child, until he, depraved soul, took to drugs and committed so many frightful atrocities that he had to be put away, where, in hideous confinement, he railed blasphemies at God and the ministers of God and even the sisters of the ministers of God? Their duty, they hoped they never failed in that. And now there was this Tarrandine woman with the incriminating hair. A light woman, Ambrose, the good Miss Liptret told her brother with something the effect of a child who munches over a succulent apple. A light woman, a pleasure woman. My dear Ambrose, they are dreadful to deal with, very, very dreadful. During this soul-saving conversation, the light woman was feeling anything but light, which we are bound to admit was not the customary state of grace with her. In this particular instance, as Penelope Moon agreed, she had good and sufficient reason for being both downcast and misanthropic. When one pursues or tries to pursue a high and exalted duty to oneself and one's country, and then is circumvented by fat, greasy, objectionable butchers and bakers, who wave fists which clutch long columned white slips, and mumble forth unprintable threats and recriminations. Where is the world being made safe for democracy? Where, indeed? As I was saying, Pen, Betty tearfully adjured her commiserating companion, as I was saying to the butcher, all I want to do is to give these two poor convalescent officers good red meat and plenty of it. And I asked him what possible harm there could be in that. And then the brute! He yelled, actually yelled, Pen, never caring for one instant about how sensitive my ears are, and always have been. He yelled, what the hell, Pen, did he care about two fat, wine-fed officers when his family was eating war bread and not enough of that? Of course, that doesn't seem right. But the boys first, Pen. We've all been taught that. The baker said practically the same thing, only in a different dialect, and so did the dry grocer and the greengrocer. They're shockingly bad-mannered. The gas and electric man was also to be heard as well as seen, and a variety of others. I really couldn't get all of their lists of ailments. The hue and cry was money, money, money. But dear, but Betty, darling. To cap the climax, finished Betty Terradine, waving a desperate cigarette which seemed to wreathe its pale gray smoke like loving ghostly fingers about her red hair. Old McFarland was here this morning, and had the little taste to tell me that my bank account has been ruthlessly overdrawn. He was quite horrid. He hinted, and not at all delicately, at horrid things. I might have been 80 and withered and toothless for all the difference I made to him. It's rather a mess, Pen. Did he have any suggestions to make, knowing you so long and all that? I should have thought, oh, he did say that I might borrow some on Pete's life insurance. And what good would there be in that? Besides, Peter might hear of it. And I just have the queerest feeling about letting him know that I haven't recovered one bit from extravaganza, you know. No. Now who the devil? The Reverend and Miss Liptrett, having slid in rather than await the ceremony of being announced, were greeted to Betty's inadvertent remark. They took it stoically. It was no more. It was even a little less than they had anticipated. She was smoking, too. How true to form she was running. Red hair, youth, men, cigarettes. They had now only to await the drinks, and the last proof of moral disintegration would be complete. We hear, my dear Mrs. Terradine, observed the Reverend Ambrose, seating himself daintily on the tip edge of a dainty wicker chaise lounge. We hear that 2 officers are to be billeted here. We trust this is not the truth. Betty widened her childlike eyes, small blue pools of truth, the Reverend Ambrose found himself thinking, and at the discovery of his own thoughts blushed to the sparse roots of his sparse hair. Of course it is the truth, said Betty. Colonel Preedy and his aide, Captain Rymill. We hear they're quite dears. We expect to have an awfully jolly time, champagne suppers and all that. For our country, you know. Clever, though, isn't it, to have patriotic duty and pleasure so Siamese-twinned? Miss Liptrett took to her smelling salts, and the Reverend Ambrose shook out his stiffly starched pocket-handkerchief. His sister believed in mortifying the flesh. This, he felt, was going to be harder than he had anticipated. It was painful, really painful. Mrs. Terradine was a child, a baby, who must have a candy-coated, dangerous pacifier removed from her pink lips. Too pink, the Reverend admitted to himself, albeit reluctantly. But, my dear Mrs. Terradine, the minister of God rallied himself from the strained sensation, and surely unprecedented of falling into a rose-pink mist. My dear Mrs. Terradine, surely not without a chaperone. My sister Tabby here would be only too pleased, I am sure. Our duty, we always. Betty Terradine gave one of her laughs. They were exclusively her laughs. How funny of you, she chortled. You see, my dear man, I've been married. I'm quite within the law. He, Peter, my husband, I would say, left me because I was so terribly, extravagant. Miss Liptrett swayed slightly. The Reverend Ambrose shook his head. How very, very sad, he said. Those whom God hath joined together. How do you take it, my dear Mrs. Terradine, my poor suffering sister in our Lord? My heart would be broken, said Betty blithely, if I had that kind of heart. Did you love him, my dear Mrs. Terradine? Asked the Reverend Ambrose ever so gently. He had never known before what the small word dear may come to mean. To desperation, said Betty Terradine succinctly, and I drove him to the same state. "And now?" pursued the minister of a just God. "And you feel now?" "I don't feel," said Betty rather shortly and rising. "The milk's spilt, and I haven't the time nor the agility to lap it up. Thank you so much for calling, Miss Liptrett." It came to Betty in the middle of the same night. It's with Betty were always her inspirations. She had been dreaming, rather horribly. She had been dreaming of hands holding closely columned white slips, and on the back of each hand there seemed to be a face, and each face was the round, fat, blinking face of the Reverend Liptrett. And now she woke up and knew, quite suddenly, with a pounding heart, that she could send herself a telegram saying that Peter Teradyne was dead, and she could show it to McFarland, and he would arrange for her to collect all of Peter's life insurance, which was ample and considerable. Peter might never know. He was so far away. He had told her that if there was an opposite end of the earth, he was going to ferret it forth and remain there. Generally Peter did as he said he would. Besides, there would be compensation in such a sum. The law of compensation, that was the thing. She stole into Penn's room and told her all about it. In the morning she wrote the telegram, and Penn, who was detailed to meet Colonel Preedy, sent it to her. When the colonel arrived, he found a most charming person with scarlet hair, clad in black, and weeping studiously. He was called upon to be consolatory, and he was nothing loath. It was in such a manner that Captain Rymill, the colonel's aide, entered upon the heels of his superior officer and begged to be allowed to add his services at such a time. "Her husband," he muttered. "Beastly sad." The scarlet-haired widow glanced up with a coy sniffle. Peter Rymill stumbled, apparently over nothing. Betty gave an unwidow-like shriek, directed to some remote heaven, and blasting to the ear impromptly, and for the first time in her unhysterical career, fainted completely away. It was daybreak when Betty sufficiently recovered to be able to take stock of the situation. A situation inevitably appealed to her. This one, as the sun slipped its cloudy blankets and winked redly at the world, began to. It began to appeal enormously. Her blue eyes gained 2 stars, and the stars twinkled. There seemed to be little red things gleaming in her hair, but her mouth was curved in a little crooked smile, and the smile was very tender. Peter was under her roof. Under the same roof again, sleeping. Old Peter. Something about it was nice. Nicer than anything had been in a long, long while. Had she been lonely? Of course not. That was too absurd. But old Peter, here, back from the war and wounded. Old Peter. She rose and dressed and stole down the stairs. She wanted to get out. She wanted to hear the birds waking up and the roses. She wanted the smell of the morning. She hadn't wanted these things in a while, a long while. Not since she had first known of her love for Peter Teradyne. One has to have gone a long way, it is said, before one can care about the birth of an April daisy. Suddenly it came to her that she had gone a long way, longer than anybody believed, under her frivolous manner, under her flippancies. Nobody would be up. Peter was convalescing. "Hello," said Peter Rymill. "I came down jolly early, I suppose. I wanted to hear the morning throw off the blankets. Haven't felt this way since I was a kid." They walked out into the garden, into the first garden in a newborn world. It was stirring from its sleep, and there were perfumes delicious. The morning was delicately blue, and it was blushing. "What do you think of me?" asked Betty. "What I have always thought. No better, no worse." They both laughed. She never had been able to laugh, as she had always been able to laugh, with old Peter. "I had to have the insurance money. I sent myself the telegram." "Clever. I didn't give you credit." "Neither does anybody else. That's why I had to send it." They both laughed again. And it was no laughing matter, but the morning was so young, ridiculously young. "I shan't spoil your game." "That's jolly of you, Peter. You always were a four-squarer. But honestly, I have been more economical. But you see, billeting officers, there are matters of rare beefsteaks and fresh fruits and out-of-season things. I know, charity is expensive, especially patriotic charity. You are kind." "Not at all. The hospitality is all yours. At least, we have no call to quarrel now, Betty." "No," agreed Betty, and discovered how ardently she yearned for mortal combat. "I changed my name when I went away, you know," confessed Peter. "I thought so." "Did you suspect that Mrs. Teradyne might be me?" "Of course not." "How can you think so? And in New England?" "I never suspected you of New England, Betty." "Shall we play the game through?" Of course, why not? I think Penelope is going to like Colonel Preedy. It's in the air. Then we'll be a foursome. You always did go in for situations, Betty. I know, said Betty soberly, and threw away the June rose she was holding. Later on, Peter Rymel came back, and picked it up carefully and tenderly. Life in the Terradine establishment moved with the momentum that not even the village could have conjured up for it. Not that the village wasn't talking. Never that. Hadn't Peter Rymel been seen and heard in the various shops of the village settling that Terradine woman's long overdue accounts? Hadn't Reverend Miss Tabitha Liptrett heard him paying the butcher's bill? Seen him, for the matter of that? It could only mean one thing, naturally. And the Colonel person. Was he or was he not seen with Penelope Moon, mooning along the less frequented ways and byways of the outraged village? He was, and their looks. These were not the things, however, that were disturbing the inmates of the temporary billet. There were darker matters afoot. The darkest was that Peter Rymel seemed to find Penelope Moon a veritable tonic for his eyes, if staring at her 3/4 of his waking time was any conclusive proof. Betty, tormented, thought that it was. On the other hand, Colonel Preedy seemed to Peter Rymel and Penelope Moon to have nothing on earth better to do than get his vision scarletly entangled, and nothing more to say than a sing-song repetition of the praises of the Titian variety of woman. As for Betty Terradine, a colonel was a triumph, she said. Penelope spoke daily of returning home. Peter Rymel protested that that was all rot, damned rot. Betty was miserably silent, and still more miserable because she was silent. The one amusing thing in all their world was the fact that the Reverend Ambrose literally denied his God to propose the sacrament of matrimony to the scarlet-haired woman. He was too ridiculously funny, half-wept the overwrought Betty in describing the scene. He sandwiched his amorous declarations with fearful airings of his wretched little scruples. In one breath he said, "I love you to distraction," and in the next he affirmed, "I will save you from damnation." In the third he cried out that I was the blessed damozel leaning down from heaven, and in the fourth that I was a snare and a delusion. Eventually he tottered away, wilted, starchless, probably penitential. After dinner Penelope stayed at the table with Betty while the men sought the terrace for their smokes. Penelope was white, and said that her head ached like the very devil. "I'll tell you, Betty," she admitted suddenly, "I'm a little rat, I suppose. But I'm mad over Colonel Preedy, and I can't stay here and see you two love each other. Betty, don't cry. Don't, dear, Betty sobbed noisily. "You goose," she sniffed. "You bat, you blind bat, you bug in a rug. I'm not in love with your old colonel. I'm in love with Peter, with my Peter Terradine." "With your husband?" "My dearest. With Peter Rymel, who isn't Peter Rymel at all, but just Peter, old Peter, Peter whom I love." "Betty, oh, Betty, what can you do?" "Die," groaned Betty tragically. "Die like a rat in its hole. In its hole." Betty did the next best thing she could to dying in a hole. She was perched airily and rather inauspiciously in a cherry tree the afternoon following her confession to Penelope, when she overheard Peter and Penelope coming down the path, and Peter was saying that they had orders to move on. They sat on the bench directly beneath her, and when she parted the branches to peer through, Pin's head was on Peter's shoulder. She didn't wait to hear what he was saying, which solely concerned the absent colonel, but fell through the branches and rolled ignominiously upon the gravelled path at their very feet. When they picked her up, Peter, with strange mutterings, which might have been blasphemies or endearments, she couldn't take a step. "Sprained ankle," said Peter, looking unduly greenish-white. Then, seeing Colonel Preedy in the near distance, he hailed him. "Carry Betty to her room," he called. "She's had a bally tumble." He added, "He's so mad about her, I'll give him his chance. I've lost mine, so what the—" Penelope glared at Peter and brought up the rear. The evening was closing down like a pair of folding sable wings over the Terradine establishment. Betty had been bandaged and fed up on port wine. Penelope was packing in her room and dropping more tears than garments into her innovation. Colonel Preedy was packing in his suite. Peter was wafting about the corridors, ghost-like and beset with his old love for Betty, Betty who had driven him mad, but never so mad that his love for her wasn't the maddest of all. In all the four corners of the earth he had tried to forget her, and in the battle-din, and he hadn't been able to. It had beaten him down. What if she did spend money? What if she did do mad, bad, foolish things? What did it matter what she did? Essentially, she was Betty, scarlet-haired, extravagant maid-to-love. He groaned and tried the knob of her door. She would be sleeping, childlike, after her fall. He knew. He would go in and kiss her for goodbye, kiss her tears away. Just once, just for the last time. He would kiss her and go away. Yes, kiss her and go away. Leave her for someone else. For Preety, no doubt. Good God! Good God, how the damned thing clawed at his heart! She was sleeping, and he stole over to her bed and bent over her. Child that she was. Baby. Playing through the playhouse of the world. Pouting when the playhouse didn't suit. Baby. But how he loved her. Someone was coming in. Someone else. He dropped to his knees and rolled under the bed. It was Preety. The hound. Preety. But what was he doing? Prowling on Betty's dressing table, handling her things, furtively. What the hell, had Preety gone unaccountably mad? Had the war got him after all? Preety, he was stealing a picture. Stealing! Why, it was Penelope's picture, and he was kissing it. Preety was kissing it, and with never a glance at the woman sleeping on the bed. Old Preety and little Penelope, of course. He understood a lot of things now. Love. Deuced queer, but heavens, how it hurt. Someone else was coming. Peter almost laughed aloud to see the dignified colonel bolt for the clothes-press and close himself in. The door opened, and Penelope stood on the threshold, very red of face. "Betty, they insist," she began, then angrily. "Miss Liptrett, can't you see that she's asleep?" "I see," said Miss Liptrett, through frigid lips. "A man beneath her bed. The man, and he is not asleep. Not by any means. It can mean only one thing, naturally." Peter crawled forth. He rose to his full height, and then sat familiarly down upon the bed. Betty opened her eyes, surveyed the group, then looked at Peter. They widened and misted, and suddenly her heart was in them. And it was all for him, for Peter, for old Peter. He understood and encircled her with his arm. Miss Liptrett was on the immediate verge of collapse. Peter gave a short laugh. "Sorry," he said, "to spoil your fun, my dear lady. All of you, because you are, you know, having one hell of a good time. Now calm yourself. After all, you are far more acquainted with hell than either my wife or myself. Yes, my wife. Matrimony. A sacrament, you know. Oh, years ago. Naturally. You see, the dirt has been in your own minds, no place else. A vacuum cleaner, my dear lady, excellent for drawing up the dirt, then a good disinfectant. I dare say you'll come around. Yes, my wife. Quite so. Ta-ta." The Reverend Liptrett and his more than reverend sister took their duty with them and were through. Peter Carradine took his wife into his arms, then yelled, "Come out of the clothes there, Preety, and go spoon with your moon. Best of luck, old chap." "Oh, Betty," he said, so soon as they were gone. "Oh, Betty, the years we waste, the years we waste. Give me the kiss I haven't had since the world before last." End of section 17.